Here I present to you the Dunu SA6. It's a newer reformed IM from Dunu. It's a 6BA IM, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's probably 6BA due to the big 6 right here. It's pretty dumb if they use other configuration, but then again, it's the M7 is a 4BA setup, so this is probably 6BA from Dunu. It's a very well tuned IM. It's quite different from the Dunu Luna that we've reviewed before in this channel. The Dunu Luna, while it's very technical, it's not as well tuned. It doesn't sound $1,700. It's not $1,700 well tuned. But this sounds very well tuned. The tonality here is just very good. It's very pleasant. It sounds good on almost anything. It sounds like a true all-rounder. Never sounds offensive or bright or incredibly piercing or unpleasant at any tracks that I use with them. Although it kind of also reminds me on the U12T, when people started comparing these to the U12T. When the first time I listened to them, I instantly remembered the U12T. And it's quite surprising too that their technical performance is also very similar to the U12T. I mean, not in terms of how good they are, but on what are they good at, on what they are good at, kind of reminds me of the U12T. So I guess that is the TLDR of this review. So with the Dunu SA6, the overall tonality, I can say it's somewhat of a neutral with bass boost type of tonality. It's somewhat of a balanced type of tuning. It's not very U-shaped or V-shaped sounding, but it's more of a warmish, balanced tuning. It is inoffensive. So everything in general, in terms of instruments or vocal tonality, always sound good. In my opinion, there are two switches. There one switch at each IM, on each IM. The on switch and the one switch. You can flip it to on, or you can flip it down to one. I personally like them at the on position, where it gets a little bit more lower mids and mid bass, overall more bass extension and more bass elevation. Here it adds a little bit more heft to its presentation, and vocals tend to get a bit thicker in its presentation, especially for male vocals. So yeah, keep in mind here, I'm going to judge the IM based on the on position. I don't know what it's called, but I'm going to say it's the on position. The build quality here is very good. It's very solid. It's resin. It's just resin, but the cable is very nice in my opinion. It's Dunu always make good cables. Even the Dunu Luna has fantastic cable. It terminates to whatever you want, whatever you fucking want. You can plug in the I had the 3.5 adapter, but you can plug in any type of termination you want at them. So yeah, a very versatile, good quality cable in my opinion, and I really like it. Very good. It's not as soft as I would probably like, but it works. Okay, it's simple. It's very versatile. Sounds okay. It does its job. So very good, and it's capable. I don't have a lot of their ear tips because the person who sent me this only gives me a pair of ear tips that does not fit my ear, and the cable, and a 4.4 and a 3.5 millimeter jack. So yeah, I mostly listen to the 4.4 because I usually listen to the with the Jotunheim and the HIBY R6 Pro. With power requirements, I think this is an easy to drive IM. You can basically power it with anything and it would sound good with everything. Although with this review I'm going to, and especially at this comparison against the IM that I have right here, I'm going to use the Jotunheim 2 with powered by the Modius as the amp that's going to determine which one is better, because it's not because the Dunu SA6 but the EX1000, the M7 specifically needs high quality power, high quality amp to really sound decent, really sound good. So with the HIBY R6 Pro, the Dunu SA6 would absolutely destroy these two in terms of almost all categories. Maybe not this in the terms of soundstage with the M7, but almost all categories the Dunu SA6 would absolutely destroy the EX1000 and the M7. But with adequate amount of amping and clean and high quality amping, the EX1000 and the M7 would stand a much better chance against the Dunu SA6, and we'll get to that later. Yeah, so very well built. Overall, very pleasant sounding. And how about the technicalities? We'll get to that after we get to the trifecta. Okay, we talk about the bass. The bass here is sadly one of the more disappointing part of the IM. I think it sounds very BA. Yeah, I don't think it sounds as BA as the what do you call it, the C Audio Bravery. I think it has a bit more weight, not just weight, it has a bit more decay to its presentation. It's not as dry sounding as the Bravery, although the speed, I think it's still very fast and very adequate for its overall presentation. The punchiness, it's quite punchy. It's surprisingly quite punchy. It doesn't have definitely doesn't have the U12T bass. It doesn't have the M7 bass in terms of weight and overall decay and overall DD dynamic driver-ish presentation, although it's still a bloody good one, a bloody good bass. In terms of detail in the bass, I don't think it's the best either. I think something even like the 7Hz Timeless I have right here is going to be better in terms of texture and overall depth and overall weight and body to the bass. So yeah, it's not the most resolving type of bass that I would like for an IEM at the price range of $550. I think I would prefer just a bit more heft and body and overall resolution to it. But yeah, it's a tight, it's a bit less dry sounding than the Bravery, so it's a overall decent bass. Actually, it's overall decent bass. The punch is very good too, though. The dynamics of the bass is very good too. So an overall decent bass. The mid-range here is one of my favorite in this IM definitely. It's warm. It's quite warm. It somewhat reminds me of the Manga T type of mid-range. It's a bit more elevated at the 2K. It's a bit more relaxed at 3K region. So it's not very shouty. It's not very bright sounding. It's not very open, like someone of a very open sounding mid-range. It doesn't sound like the Blessing 2 type of mid-range. It sounds more like the Manga T tonality, and also with the extra elevation at 800 Hz and 1K, I think it adds a bit more body to the mid-range, to the vocals, for both male and female vocals. I really like the presentation of vocals in the Dunu Luna in terms of tuning. So yeah, for the mid-range, I think it's very solid. It's very relaxed, very chill. Not very relaxed too. It's adequately relaxed, and doesn't do anything wrong here. Yeah, so I really like the mid-range here. For treble region, the elevation, overall elevation for me, it's quite balanced in my opinion. Maybe I'm missing a bit upper treble elevation, although I would prefer the upper treble elevation here rather than the U12T, because the U12T in my opinion is a bit more, it's a bit too much, I guess. It's too elevated in the upper treble region. This is slightly behind what my personal preference is, but it's closer there. It's closer. It's a bit more well extended than the Blessing 2. It's a bit more extended than the EX1000, although it's not as airy, you can say, as both the Timeless and the M7. With the Timeless here, I'm using the Sony Triple Comfort tips here, because with the Timeless you need the tip roll. It sounds very different with different tips. With the X1000, with the M7, I'm using the Sony hybrid tips and stock cables. With the EX1000, I don't have their stock cable, not anymore. So I'm using the Effect Audio Origin cable with an adapter, and I'm using the super small ear tips, fit like an Etymotics. With the Blessing 2s, I'm using a Tripoin Zion cable. It really doesn't matter. The Blessing 2 sounds good with anything, to be completely honest. Yeah, I'm using the for 4.4 balance, because my Blessing 2 is terminated 3.5mm, the usual Moondrop lace cable. So yeah, just keep in mind that for comparison, if you have either one of these. So the mid-range presentation and the treble presentation, in my opinion, is very good, although might be a little bit not elevated enough at the upper treble region, although most of the time I'm never bothered by that, maybe when I listen to orchestra, but then again, it's still at the region or at the range that I am okay with it. Yeah, it's very smooth sounding overall. It's not bad. Nothing sounds wrong there. You do have quite a dip at 5.6K and 6K at that region. I think it's fine. I don't perceive that dip like at all. Every instrument sounds well balanced up there too. The harmonics, all of them works very well there. Yeah, very balanced treble. I really like it. For technical performance, I think it's quite technical. If you remembered what I mentioned before, that how similar in its technical performance with the U12T. I'm talking about these things are good at what the U12T are good at, which means it's good at detail and it's good at soundstage depth, stage depth. So, and it is exactly what's these things good at. It's it's decently detailed. For its price, it's decently detailed. I noticed that I instantly noticed that this is more detailed than the Blessing 2s. I instantly noticed that this is more detailed than the Timeless. But the question is it more detailed than something like the M7s or the EX1000? And with the M7, it kind of depends on which region of the frequency response are you talking about. If you're talking about bass, I think the M7 still have a bit more decay and overall slight refinement to its presentation. Although the SA6 is definitely cleaner in its presentation and a bit more tighter in its presentation, and also it's a bit more punchier. Although the overall, I think I still can hear a bit more information in terms of bass in the M7s than the Dunu SA6. For vocals, it's also quite a toss-up, because with the female vocals, it's definitely much better here. You also hear a bit more detail at the mid-range, at female vocals here also. For male vocals, I think you can feel a bit more texture in the M7s. So yeah, but in treble region, the treble frequencies, I think the M7's treble is just horrible. I don't know if you've seen a review of the M7s, you might notice that 50% of the review is going to be the M7 is dark sounding, and the other 50% is going to be bright and intense sounding. My particular M7 is more to the bright and intense sounding, and I find that there is quite a significant elevation at 9 to 11k kilohertz, yeah. And that region, I noticed quite a bit of an elevation there and a peak there. So, the presentation of my particular M7's treble presentation is not very good. It sounds very harsh. It sounds piercing. It's not the most pleasant presentation of an IEM, especially at this price. With the SA6, it's very smooth, very clean, very pristine sounding in its treble presentation. So, in its treble region, I think the SA6 beats the M7 quite easily. And with the bass region, I think it's more of a toss-up, I guess. If you're looking for a more natural, more weighty, organic timbre, I think the M7 has that in the bag. Although if you're looking for a bit more exciting, punchy presentation, the Dunu SA6 is a bit better there too than the M7. With the Timeless basically wins at bass and soundstage. And for a lot of people, that is the number one thing. And this, the Timeless has better treble extension too. It has better extension both ways, and bass and a treble. So yeah, it's very, very, very good IEM, especially at its very, very low price. It's surprising at how a $200 IEM can treat blows with the SA6, which is in itself a very good, very decent IEM. In terms of detail, the SA6 would smoke the Timeless, except for the bass region. I still think the Timeless has more advantages in its bass region due to its more weighty and full-bodied and well-extended presentation. Even though they all, like the Timeless, the SA6, and also the U12T with the SA6 on the on switch, has equal amount of bass loudness when you actually measure it in a frequency response, for its frequency response. But with the presentation of the Timeless being a bit more weighty and those things, I think the overall bass is just superior. than the SA6, and it's quite logical in my opinion, because this is a planar and planar bass is something else, and this is a BA bass, so it's normal, I think, if you much prefer the timeless bass than the SA6 bass. The overall dynamics, I think the SA6 is very dynamic, although it's not the most dynamic. It's not going to be as dynamic as the Sony EX1000. It's not going to be as punchy, not going to be as quick as the Sony EX1000. But it's a bit more punchy. It's a bit more dynamic than something like the M7s. I haven't talked about the Blessing 2s a lot. With the bass of the Dunu SA6, if I'm going to compare it with the Blessing 2, I think the Blessing 2 would win because of its dynamic driver being there. It has a bit more texture too. It has a very adequate amount of speed too. However, for overall detail, I would say that the Dunu Luna is slightly more detailed overall, except for the bass region, than the Blessing 2s. I think it's much closer to the M7s than the Blessing 2s. So it's about neck and neck with the M7s in terms of overall detail. Even though and I would like to note again that the timbre of the treble here is not very good, although the detail is still good there. It's about neck and neck in detail with the M7, with the Blessing 2 is slightly behind it. Is overall detail, and the timeless is slightly behind the Blessing 2. But if you're talking about price, yeah, the Blessing 2 and the timeless is very good at price to performance ratio. For overall, and the X1000 is going to be a bit better than the M7 and the Dunu SA6 with an adequate amount of amp quality. So yeah, in terms of soundstage, it's not the widest, but it's one of the deepest soundstage. It kind of reminds me of the U12T. I think it's slightly, ever so slightly narrower than the Blessing 2. So I think the Blessing 2 has a bit more expansiveness in its presentation. Although in terms of just depth, I think the SA6 is slightly deeper. It's slight but noticeably deeper than the Blessing 2s, and it's quite a huge praise because the Blessing 2 has a very, very deep soundstage and great imaging and separation, but the SA6 I think wins there too. So yeah, I think it's a solid upgrade from the Blessing 2s. If you have the Blessing 2s and you want something quite different, I don't think it's a strict upgrade, because there are things that the Blessing 2 does better than the Dunu Lunas. For example, the bass texture, the bass depth, the overall I think the overall imaging is quite similar. The overall separation is quite similar too. However, the depth here is slightly better in the Dunu Lunas, the Dunu SA6. While the soundstage is a bit better here in terms of overall tonality and balance in its frequency response. I think the Dunu Luna is a bit more balanced than the Blessing 2s. The Blessing 2s is a bit thin, in my opinion. It's not the most balanced, and its treble presentation too is not as balanced as the SA6, because it's quite a bit elevated in its lower and mid treble, and quite dark in its upper treble region, quite subdued there. And for the EX1000, I think for bass and mid range, it's noticeably more detailed than the everything else on this table. When I listened to a lot of well recorded tracks like Chesky, or even something like the what do you call it? The Dream Theater. I forgot I closed music app. Dream theater music. I think the mid and the bass is a bit more cleaner sounding. It's a bit less grainy sounding. I think it's a cleaner presentation with the EX1000, though I can still hear a very small amount of grain in the Dunu Lunas and the what do you call it, the M7s. So yeah, it's a very noticeable difference if you're going to talk about bass and mid detail. But if you're going to go with the treble detail, by the way, I forgot to mention that I removed the filter on the EX1000, so it's basically a filterless. And from my experience, the filtered EX1000, although it's a bit warmer in its presentation, it's less technical. It's less detail, less extension in its treble extension. It's a bit more extended in its bass. The filtered version's a bit more extended in the bass, but with the filterless, it's a bit more detailed. It's a bit more open sounding. It's a bit you have a bit more upper mids there. It's less nasally, and it has better treble extension. So with the filterless, I think the amount of extension that the EX1000 have is only slightly behind the SA6. Although with the filtered EX1000, it's going to be a lot less well extended than the SA6. So yeah, the overall tonal balance of the SA6 is also much better than the EX1000, because the EX1000 has that type of weird presentation in its treble going on there. The bass and the mids, I think I would prefer the EX1000, but a treble is something else. Yeah, it's so, all in all, the Dunu SA6 is a very good IEM. It's a very decent IEM. It's going to be enjoyable for most audiophiles. Most of you it's going to enjoy the Dunu SA6. The timbre of the Dunu SA6 is noticeably BA everywhere, from bass, mids and treble, so it's not going to be an organic sounding IEM. You do have a slight BH timbre in its vocals too, very noticeable. And yeah, if you don't mind the BA timbre for your IEMs, I think the Dunu SA6 is going to be a very, very solid pick, very, very well tuned pick, and a very decently technical IEM for its price range. So yeah, that's it for the video today. Don't forget to watch Jason's video. See you next time. Godspeed.